Well, today's a Sunday, and there's not anything too pressing going on, so I thought, this would be a good opportunity for me to go over the state of the Democratic race because, I used to be a big political junkie before, I got red-pilled, so to speak, on all the foreign policy stuff, and that kind of became my biggest issue. But I do still find the politics stuff entertaining, and I do think that it is a fun thing to study. And of course, on top of all that, it is important to keep a watch of the primaries because the primaries are really the more, I think, I guess you could say Democratic or sort of popular based part of our electoral process in America. You see a lot more differences between voters because they have more choices. So there's more differentiation. It's not a simple binary, are you going to go with Coke or Pepsi? So they're a lot more interesting than, say, a general election. And so by looking at the state of the Democratic race, it tells us, quite a bit about, voters in the Democratic Party, particularly in these early states. So right now, the media's darling, Pete Buttigieg, or Buttigieg, or however you want to say it. I call him Buttigieg because I don't know what his, I never really find which official pronunciation I should pick. So he's on top right at the moment with, Bernie in second place, Warren in third, Biden in fourth. And those, depending on the state, they might be switched around a couple of ways, but that's generally the top four as we are right now. It's pretty much a four-man race, or three-man, one-woman, but, you can use the term man to apply to women, too. And I think that we're getting to the point to where it's safe to say that I don't think that there's going to be anyone new coming up, any newcomers who are going to enter the fray and be a potential contender. I think we're pretty much going to end up with one of these four. It seems like the race is consolidating a little bit, because it's not quite as fractured. It's still heavily fractured. There's way too many. I think everyone else who's not in those top four really should drop out, except for maybe Tulsi because, she's there to spread a message, not to get elected. Not to get off on a tangent, but I think it's pretty clear that the reason why Tulsi is running for president this time is because, she, like many other people, assumed that Bernie last time around would attack Hillary on her foreign policy, and that, he would represent the anti-war left well. Well, he didn't do that. Bernie doesn't really care about the foreign stuff so much. He more cares about economics, which, is obviously his weakest point, his weakest position from my perspective as someone who's actually, studied economics and doesn't think so much about rainbows and unicorns when it comes to economics. But anyway, so Tulsi is there essentially to add in the anti-war message that Sanders' campaign is lacking. Tulsi worked on Sanders' campaign in 2016, and I'm sure, she would, if she wasn't running, she'd support him again. So it's pretty clear that hers is not about winning, so she doesn't need to drop out. She's doing a decent job of spreading the anti-war stuff, so her staying in. But the rest of them should drop out. Really, Cory Booker, do we need you? No. Cory Booker is, interchangeable with this Pete Buttigieg guy. They're pretty similar candidates, and you could make the same case about any of the other candidates that they're pretty similar to one of the other four. There's enough differentiation. So I guess we should start and go over the chances of these four right now and how I think things are going to play out. Because obviously we've got a long way. It's a long road to the Iowa caucuses and an even longer road to the convention. So I guess starting with Bernie, I didn't think that he had a chance of winning in 2016. I don't think he has a chance of winning now. Primarily, of course, that's because the DNC will never let him. Of course, it came out recently that Obama said that he's never going to let Bernie become the nominee. He would intervene to stop it, which is, pretty big words. And so it's pretty clear that even if Bernie did have this huge popular support, kind of like he did in 2016, they wouldn't let it happen. And frankly, I don't think Bernie wants it to happen. I don't think that he has it in him. I think that he is there to spread his message primarily. And he did a very good job of that in 2016. He shifted the Democratic Party very far to the left in the last 4 years. 4 years. And so I think he's happy with what he's done. He's kind of trying to mimic the whole Ron Paul phenomenon of 2008 and 2012. Ron Paul was there not to be president, but to spread his message. And he was effective in that. And he was able to, swing the Republican Party in a more libertarian direction for a while. That's pretty much gone away. But you can still see a lot of the legacy of the Ron Paul campaign. It left a lasting effect on the Republican Party, even if the Republican Party did not become a Ron Paulian party. Stuff like the anti-war things that Trump talks about would have never been acceptable, I don't think, if you didn't have that groundwork laid by somebody like Ron Paul. And so that's basically what Bernie's trying to do here. Bernie does not have the killer instinct. He doesn't want to be president. He's not willing to really go for the jugular and take his opponents down. He's there only to have sort of a a positive in a not a positive as in good, but positive as in adding to the conversation. And so he will have support, but he's not going to be the nominee. Now Warren, someone who's tried to take up the mantle of the whole Bernie movement, of the whole democratic quote unquote socialism, which honestly I think that socialism and democracy go pretty well together, and that's not. And I don't mean that as a compliment to socialism. As Hans Hermann Hoppe once said, democracy is just moderate communism. And this is a spirit that Warren has tried to embrace and really, co-opt in a way, because underneath, she's really, as a lot of the real hardcore progressives, the more dedicated and smart people, folks like, because I try and watch the Jimmy Dore show to get a taste of the left, of what leftists are thinking. They can pretty well see that Warren is someone who's not a genuine person, who's just sort of taking this up as her style, as her strategy, as her persona for winning. But first and foremost, she wants to be president. Because Warren has had many different positions throughout the years. Of course, she used to be a conservative Republican way back when. And it's not like she had some big epiphany and she decided, oh, okay, I'm going to be a Bernie gal now. I'm going to be a socialist. She can't point to any sort of epiphany that she had. There's no real reason why she switched. It's just that, I guess maybe because Massachusetts became more of a blue state, so she wanted to, and she lives there, so she's like, okay, well, I need to be a Democrat now because everyone around me is a Democrat, and that's how I'll get elected. She really does seem just like a power-hungry type person. Because, I think she's the Ted Cruz of this race. She reminds me a lot of Ted Cruz. In that Ted Cruz in 2016, he wanted to portray himself, hey, I'm the arch conservative, and he tried to integrate, sort of the Ron Paul message into his campaign and say like, hey, I'm picking up the banner where Ron Paul left off, and I'm integrating that with Reagan, and so, I've got the new school and the old school, and I'm bringing everything together, and I'm the most conservative MF-er, and he's promising all this stuff like, oh, I'm gonna abolish the IRS, but we're keeping the income tax, which is strange. Kind of can't abolish the IRS if you're going to have the income tax. But anyway, beside the point. He also wanted to lower the income tax, top income tax, to 10%. 10% flat rate. Everybody pays 10%, which is, would be nice. That'd be a good thing. So if you did that, of course, that would mean you would have to radically cut spending. But of course, no Republican ever cut spending. And so that was a completely unrealistic proposal. There was no way Ted Cruz was ever going to cut the income tax to a flat 10% rate. And in much the same fashion, there's no way that Elizabeth Warren is going to implement her Medicare for All plan, which on its own is bigger than the entire current U.S. budget as it stands. It just costs so much that even in our very corrupt fiat money system where the Fed can, try and print money to lower interest rates for the sake of the federal government, even under all of those, in that rigged game, the government cannot pay for the proposal that Elizabeth Warren is talking about. I mean, deficits do matter. They don't matter as much for America as they do for other countries, but they do still matter. And honestly, I almost want to see her get elected and try to implement this, which, again, I don't think she would. Even if elected, just like with Ted Cruz with the 10% flat tax thing, it wouldn't happen, just like Trump's wall. And if Elizabeth Warren got elected, I don't think that the Medicare for All thing would happen in the way that she's talking about it, with all these trillions and trillions of dollars being spent every year. I don't see how that happens. But I would love to see her try, because that really would put the would destroy the federal government. It would destroy the credit of the federal government. There would be we would have a Soviet Union style collapse, probably within her term, if she really tried to do that. But I don't think Elizabeth Warren would do that, because she doesn't want to be the final president of the United States. I think that she has enough reason left in her to understand that, hey, I'm saying these things to get elected, but I can't actually do this, because that would be crazy, and I would destroy the government. And that's why someone like Bernie, is more attractive to me, by my accelerationist side, because he actually believes in this stuff. And so even if it is crazy, he would go ahead with it. Warren, I think, is someone who, could be susceptible to reason and would betray her voters and not support this, if she thought that it would destroy the finances of the United States. Oh, and another thing is her wealth tax. I don't see how that's ever going to happen anyway, because that's just that goes pretty well against the structure of democracy in America, which is democratic, de jure, but de facto corporate, in that money does play a very big role in politics. It's very important. So I don't think that she could just crap all over the billionaire class like that. It wouldn't go well for her. And I think that she would have to drop that during a general election to prevent all of the rich people from backing Donald Trump. And of course, if they did that, if Warren lost all that support, she wouldn't be able to become president. And Warren doesn't want to die on that hill. She's just trying to appeal to populists in this case. So with that said, because of her lack of principle, I do think that Warren has a chance, because she could, behind closed doors, be telling all of her billionaire friends that, hey, I'm just saying this to try and get through the primary, and once I get through the primary, I'm going to triangulate like Bill Clinton, and I'm going to drop all of this stuff. That's very possible, so I do think that Warren has a chance, unlike Bernie. Now, Sleepy Uncle Joe. A lot of people have written Uncle Joe off. They think that he is the Jeb Bush of 2020, which I think is a very fair comparison. It's one that I've made myself. It's one that I would continue to make. However, I don't think that he is necessarily doomed to the same extent that Jeb Bush was. You see, Joe Biden has something that these other top four candidates don't have, or the other three, Buttigieg, Sanders, and Warren, and that's that, he actually can get votes from black people. Black people in this country as a whole are not particularly progressive, but they happen to be Democrats. So, having all these Democrats fighting to be who's the arch progressive is not really going to help win any of these folks over. Somebody like, Bernie won absolutely no black votes in 2016, so he's not getting any share of the black vote. Warren, I haven't seen her numbers exactly, but I'd imagine that she'd be somewhat like Bernie, to where, she just doesn't come across well to most black Americans. And Pete Buttigieg, which I haven't gotten to him yet, but he, as I'll go over, has had a lot of problems trying to win black votes as well. And of course, he's from the Midwest. He's a very, lily white sort of guy. He's a very, he's got that mood to him. He's got that white boy vibe. Biden's a little more loose. He was Obama's VP. He's something that, he's not crazy in his proposals and things like that. So he's something that, the relatively moderate, black Democrats could get on board with a little more. They're more familiar with somebody like Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a typical Democratic establishment politician. You might not love him, but he's at least familiar. And that's why I think that Joe Biden still has a shot, because even though he's not doing too well right now in Iowa and New Hampshire, well, Iowa and New Hampshire have no black people. So as long as Joe Biden can hold on in Iowa and New Hampshire and pick up, a decent share of the delegates, as long as they can split it pretty evenly to where he's not too far behind the guy in first place, or woman in first place, well, then once the primaries start to move to the South, well, then Biden's going to dominate, because there's a lot of black, as far as the Democratic Party goes, a lot of black voters in the South. So if Biden can hold on until South Carolina, then I think that he has a very decent shot at winning the nomination, and probably will, because once they get through Iowa and New Hampshire, and I can't remember the exact order, they might go to Nevada early too. And if Nevada's, I haven't checked the Nevada polls, but not a lot of black people in Nevada. But Biden can hold out until they get to the South, I don't think that a lot of these super ultra-progressive candidates that are appealing to white suburbanites, okay, people not only, these aren't even working-class white people. These are suburbanites. These are, folks who work in offices, people who, soccer moms and stuff like that, people whose kids play lacrosse. That's who, all this progressive stuff is mostly appealing to. There's not a lot of that in the South. And Biden's whole working-class Joe shtick would appeal very well there, I think. And so last but not least, we have Pete Buttigieg, the leader of the pack right now. I do think that he has a chance of holding out. But I'm still leaning towards the idea that he is just sort of the flavor of the month candidate right now. We see this in primaries in the year leading up to the Iowa caucuses that we'll see certain candidates become very popular for a few weeks and then they'll just sort of burn themselves out. Like with people like Ben Carson or Herman Cain or Rick Perry. If you remember in the past Republican primaries in 2012 and 2016. So I think Buttigieg could very easily be one of those. But at the same time, he's amorphous enough and unprincipled enough, kind of like Warren, to where I think that he's very adaptable and he's really willing to say whatever he has to get himself elected. I think the Democratic establishment would be perfectly happy with him, maybe even more happy with him than Warren. Because he's sort of he's the fresh face. But he's perfectly malleable. He will do whatever he's told once he's in office. He'd be a great, figurehead. And he's young, so he'll definitely, be able to be reelected in 4 years, which Biden most likely won't. Which is why if he's the nominee, the VP slot will become incredibly important because that person will very likely become president. And so Buttigieg, as I sort of alluded to earlier, his problem right now is that he's doing very well in Iowa and New Hampshire. He's leading in the polls. However, he has a problem with black people. The black media does not like him. The Root published a big piece, a hit piece on him recently. He's apparently, for whatever reason, he doesn't get along well with the blacks. So that will really hurt him once he gets past Iowa and New Hampshire, because Iowa and New Hampshire are some of the whitest places in America. And so his whole strategy of appealing to the white suburbanites is going to do him very well there, and he very well might win both of those states. But once he gets to South Carolina, like I said, he's going to get absolutely murdered by Joe. But who knows, if he builds up enough momentum in Iowa and New Hampshire, because again, Iowa and New Hampshire are very important, because you win those two states, you've got a ton of momentum, and you can keep moving on. And even in states where you might not have done as well, you're going to pick up support because, hey, you look like the eventual winner, and people like a winner, so people are going to vote for the guy that they think is going to win. And so Pete might be able to make up for his weakness amongst black voters if he has that sort of aura of inevitability tied to him. But in order to do that, he's going to have to really win Iowa and New Hampshire. It's going to have to look like an absolute one-sided victory. It can't be evenly split with him just barely winning with 22% of the vote in Iowa and New Hampshire, and then splitting the rest with everybody else, because then, in terms of delegates, the other folks will not be too far behind him, so it'll still very easily be a four-man race. And so if he's not clearly the winner by the time we get past Iowa and New Hampshire, well, then I don't think that he will win. I think that Biden very well will overtake him, or whoever, whether it be even if it's Sanders and Warren or Warren. I think that, and again, Warren, I think that the jury is still out on her whether she can compete in the South or not. From the beginning, though, I thought Warren was way too cringy to really win the nomination. I think that she's not the most skilled person when it comes to this whole politics stuff. Then again, Joe Biden isn't either. So maybe I shouldn't let that deter her. So that's pretty much the state of the race right now. I think the question now is whether Biden will be buried in Iowa and New Hampshire and be left behind, or whether he will be still kicking and alive in time for South Carolina to make his big comeback. Because of course, remember Bill Clinton famously lost Iowa and then won New Hampshire, and New Hampshire made Bill Clinton the comeback kid. We could see something similar happen with Sleepy Uncle Joe after Iowa and New Hampshire. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.